research I've managed to glean and get around the plight, especially of retailers in the current corona economy. I'd like to start off by sharing the story of Mike Tyson, who argued that everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face. And every business owner I know with and have worked with certainly had a plan until the corona economy happened upon us. And it is as if we have been punched in the face. It is a massive, massive shock. But there's one big difference, and that is this man over here is what a winner looks like. This man fought Mike Tyson in his 44th fight. Buster Douglas was a little known heavyweight champion. He had a very mixed record. He was not very charismatic. He was not very convincing, in fact, and he was not a very, very determined fighter. He was a fill-in fight for Mike Tyson. And yet in the 8th round, that's how long Buster lasted before he was knocked to the ground after being hit in the face by Mike Tyson. But he got up. And in the 10th round, he knocked out Mike Tyson. It was Mike Tyson's first defeat as a world champion. And for a short while, Buster Douglas took the belt. Fighters and winners get up. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk specifically around negotiating with your landlords. As retailers, undoubtedly, it is the most severe and onerous fixed overhead that you face in your businesses. In an environment where we have been shut down and you cannot trade by law, still landlords, I believe, some are coming to the party, some aren't, some are coming with all sorts of negotiations, but I think you need to lead the negotiation, and you need to lead it based on the intimate knowledge you have of your business. The intention behind this is for you to get up and fight to live for another day so that post-lockdown, we can recover our investments as private business owners and investors in our own businesses in order to regain severely lost ground in the hope of recovering our own investments. It serves you to do that, it serves your staff to do it, and it serves South Africa to do it too. So let's get into it. What lies ahead? There's a tremendous storm, not only outside right now, but I think ahead of us too. And I want to share with you a graph, probably one of the most thoughtful graphs that I have seen so far coming out of the United States. If you look at this image over here, we are sitting now, March 20, April 20. We're somewhere in between over there. It's expected to peak in the States, probably halfway through the period of this month to the later part of this month. And eventually those infections start to come down. They're expecting able testing to be delivered from June 20 to July 20. The tests that they're referring to are the Abbott tests from Abbott Laboratories. This was a test that was funded by Bill Gates for $100 million, part of the Gates Foundation. The test is able to give you very, very good insight, very fast, in a couple of minutes or so, whether you have been tested positive for COVID or not. It's a key mitigation strategy towards preventing and stopping the contamination of COVID and the subsequent deaths that are expected to emerge as a result of it. But look at this here. Only in the middle of October, more or less, are they expecting vaccines for healthcare workers, with schools only going back in late September, early October. And then they're expecting vaccines to be broadly available around March 21. My understanding from Abbott Laboratories is they're producing 50,000 tests a month at the moment. They're expecting that to scale up in about 3 to 4 months from now to 2 million tests a month. There are 350 million Americans that are going to be attended to first, I can assure you, given the Trump regime. Hopefully, they would have licensed out the capability of the test to be produced, and we should start seeing a vaccine come into South Africa where it would be widely available and comprehensively available and freely available, probably around March, April, May, June next year. We have some time to go. What will govern our forecast? What can we expect post this lockdown? Firstly, a lot of people were caught by shock by the extension of 2 weeks. It doesn't mean at the end of 2 weeks, we simply all go back to business as usual. It might well mean that we start the economy slowly. The services that are going to be most severely compromised, I'm afraid to say, are those found in the social economy, where you're working with large groups of people in tight, contained spaces. That means schools, it means universities, it means casinos, hotels. It's going to be airport environments. It's going to be the retail environment as a whole. The restaurant environment is very directly affected by this, as is the hair care, nail care, and personal services retail environment. I think that we can expect a slow start to allowing us to get back to work and unshutter our stores and begin operating. And what will then determine the extent of physical distancing that's going to be required is going to be a measure of the capacity of our health services to absorb people who are infected and heal them back to health. To the extent that we don't have capacity, either in physical bed space or physical locations, if we don't have drugs, if we don't have ventilators, I think we will see a reintroduction of a lockdown for a period of a week with the view to regain capacity and try and improve capacity to help us through this period and process. I don't think that government is unaware that locking down the economy has a severe social and health cost, possibly even greater than COVID itself. But the one thing any political party cannot tolerate and not accept is to have imagery shown in media, taken on Facebook, promoted on Twitter, where you see people racked and stacked outside of hospitals, unable to get in because there isn't sufficient capacity to take care of them. It would be politically disastrous. And I think that that capacity is going to govern the extent to which we have physical distancing with intermittent lockdown. According to government, we're expecting to get there, a peak of our coronavirus flattening of the curve is going to happen in probably late August, September, October, somewhere around there. At that point in time, we'll be entering back into summer, bearing in mind that we're coming into the most difficult period seasonally at the moment around flu and vaccines. So we will see us returning back to some sort of new normality, I believe, around October, November. That means we have got three things to contend with. The first is we've got the lockdown. The second is 6 months post-lockdown, and thereafter some form of business as usual until we get to the other side of June, July next year, where the economy might well return to normal, with global vaccinations being freely available and administered. So what do we do during the lockdown period? All of us have to focus on red. In the retail environment, you need to save what you have, and you need to act immediately to save your business. It means drastic measures. It's about getting any money in that's owed to you and stopping all costs that don't support revenue. It's stopping all costs that don't support revenue. What that means is rent, tax, costs must all be stopped. Your people costs too have to then be administered now. You need to act immediately. Send letters to landlords, send letters to the tax authorities, send letters to others who carry fixed costs in your business in order to set up the negotiations. There is simply no time to have a negotiation now with the view to wait for resolution or an answer to be given. We're approaching the 15th, 16th of the month. Where are we? Yeah, the 14th of the day. Today's the 14th of April. On the 25th of the month, or at the end of the month, your debit orders will run, your overheads are going to come down and bear upon you, and you need to be sure that nothing leaves your bank account between now and until the place and point has been reached where you have successfully negotiated a position that would save your business and then support it for the next 6 months going forward. You've got to gather your people right now and get them on board and aligned. And what that means is you must share your plight with them. They need to understand the extent to which you, as a store owner, a retailer, a conglomerate of retails under your belt, they need to understand the extent to which this impacts the business. People are very, very prone at the moment to listen and hear with very keen ears. The retail environment employs a huge number of people. Everybody is aware of the plight that they all face given the lockdown. The mere fact that stores aren't open, that doors aren't open, that tills aren't ringing, and trade is not taking place has heightened this realization. The way that you engage your people over here is to, firstly, be deeply empathetic around the conditions that they face, because they're often far more severe than any store owner or retail shop owner would have themselves. At the same time, you need to demonstrate a care and empathy around how you negotiate and what you decide to do with regard to your people. One of the best strategies I've seen so far is to have open conversations with your teams. The moment you have open conversations with your teams, I've heard stories and seen already within my own client base where teams have come around and said they would rather all take a pay cut instead of having any one person retrenched or let go. People have volunteered to go down to half weeks, half days. There is a very cohesive collective force operating in amongst your retail staff. And it's important that they are negotiated last, and they are negotiated with the view to keep them able and capable to help you restart the business. Without them there is no business to start once we get out of lockdown. You then need to, in the remaining 2.5 weeks of lockdown, really apply your mind around how you're going to reset the business to run from when we do go back into the economy. Suffice to say, the way that the economy operated prior to COVID and the way that it will operate post-lockdown for at least the next 6 months is profoundly and deeply uncertain. There's lots of conjecture around what this means and how it could look. And the way that I would approach it, if I'm sitting in your shoes, is the first thing I'm going to do is talk to my customers. I really do hope that over the years of trading, you have built a customer base. Even in the retail landscape, who have you served? Who are your frequent customers? Do you have a database of them? It's important to reach out to them and start understanding what their lived reality looks like, how their economy is going to change, how you can see and expect their behavior to likely change in relation to how they classically, typically have shopped in malls, how they've shopped in shopping centers, and how they've engaged with you and your staff to consume your service and offerings. Talk to suppliers. They are equally concerned because they're equally at risk. And I can assure you, when you talk to any one supplier, many other retailers have also spoken to that supplier. And through that conversation, ideas get shared around what others are doing in order to survive the lockdown and plan for the next 6 months ahead. Excuse me. And then finally, talk to industry bodies. I heard this afternoon on 702, or this morning on 702, the Restaurant Association through Wendy Alberts was very, very vocal around the tragedy and trauma of restaurants not trading. It's been really interesting understanding that environment. Over the last 5 years, very few retailers have not been hit by massively increased rates and taxes, the cost of electricity, the downtime and lost opportunity as a result of Eskom's failure to maintain consistent electricity, the rising costs driven by the rand dollar and inflation in general, both staffing costs and general operating costs. Everybody has been under tremendous pressure. I think it's important that you vocalize very clearly that even though you have remained open 7 days a week, you have traded actively, your ability to have built a buffer, a reserve to absorb the shock of a 1 month shutdown is simply not there. I don't believe that there are people out there thinking that you're simply taking chances. Many, many retailers are in that position right now. And to the extent that you all start vocalizing your plight within that environment, that in itself starts to reinforce the reality faced by retailers. Importantly, what sits behind this is, as retailers, you employ an enormous number of people. We cannot afford to have people find themselves unemployed. We already sit with a high unemployment rate, and there is tremendous concern all the way through from government, all the way through to the banks, all the way through to the biggest investors in our land, the big asset managers, all the way through to, I promise you, the landlords themselves. Everybody's aware of it. We must start speaking about it. We must speak about it on social media. We must speak about it on radio. We must speak about it in the news and in the press. Please get your voice heard. The plan between now and when lockdown supposedly ends on the 1st of May is to understand your next 30 days that you're going to deploy. What will you be doing for the next 30 days when you open your stores again? That activity and how you go about doing it is going to be key to setting up your negotiations with your landlords. From May to October, what you're looking to do is simply survive at this point in time. Take immediate action in a calm, steady way to secure your business. If you can simply sustain beyond that 6-month period, I think the likelihood of you surviving well into the future will be in play. When you're back in your stores, and once the stores are open again, you're going to be talking to your customers and suppliers. What you have learned from them during the lockdown period and what you see their talk turning into walk post-lockdown will start to govern and determine a lot of what you need to do to create new offerings and understand their new realities. I have no doubt that over the next 2.5 weeks, there will be legislation that comes out around physical distancing. If you run a restaurant, if you run a hair salon, if you run anything that offers personal services in a retail environment, it's highly likely the densities you used to enjoy before to give you a revenue per square meter return will be fundamentally different. I think you will have to be making additional investments in creating space between people, in creating perspex screens, for example, between tables, between workstations, between the nail bars and the workstations where nails are done and where hair is done up. You're going to have to invest in PPE clothing for your staff. You're going to have to invest in creating a very safe space that is evidently well considered for any visitors that cross the threshold of your stores. When I talk about changing your offerings and reshaping your customer experiences, let me give you a very good example of what it means. It might well mean that you decide as a store, you will test people coming in order to demonstrate, should the test be available, that you're very concerned about infection and that you are attempting to create a safe space within the domain of your store. When people enter into your stores, do they see and are they received with hand sanitizers? Do your staff have face masks? Are your staff constantly seen engaging with product prior to doing that, washing their hands, sanitizing their hands before, for example, they take a shoe for somebody to try on, or they serve a plate, or they pour the wine, or they do your nails? Those overt demonstrations that you have created a place of safety is going to be essential in order for visitors to walk in with the sense of feeling safe. Over the next 6 months, I think we're going to be fed an enormous number of statistics, and the statistics are deeply and profoundly confusing. The stats that most people will focus on are how many people are dying because of COVID, and even those stats are very difficult to ascertain accurately. We're moving into flu season. We have a lot of other ailments in our country. I'm already seeing coming out of the United States that people are arguing, sorry, just bear with me, please. That people are in a position arguing that, you know, I lost my great aunt to COVID. She was 92. I think that those kinds of stats really create a lot of confusion and anxiety. She died at 92 of old age. It wasn't COVID, it was old age. So the stats that come out around death rates are going to deeply concern people with regard to, I'm sorry about that. Someone seems to be drawing on the screen. If you could please stop doing that, thank you. Are going to deeply concern people and make people very apprehensive and very, very nervous. You need to be cognizant of it. because the facts and the perceptions are going to shift far away from each other over these next 6 months. Your stores overtly showing that you are clear and confident around creating a clean, safe space is what will set you apart. But it's going to mean increased expenses, and it's going to mean increased capacity and training within your staff. As you go through this 1 month period, looking at what you're going to be doing differently, you need to start negotiating all your costs into variable costs. Any fixed costs you have, start linking them and tying them to your revenue numbers, your turnover sales numbers. The reason for this is any fixed cost you have acts as a stopgap. It can break your business. If you variabilize all your costs, at least then you have some sort of shock absorber for the uncertainty of the next 6 months going forward. Collect evidence of all your actions, try things, see what works, see what doesn't work, and record it. Because from there, you're going to calculate the cash required that you need in order to restart and sustain your business. Any projections you make about sales that you expect to get on board, please reduce them by 50%, at least. Be conservative. Any entrepreneur prepares for the worst and hopes for the best. There is no time for hope over here. The only thing that you can pay attention to is what you have 100% control over. And that is, you must expect a rough run for the next 6 months. Be super conservative in your projections, variabilize your costs, and be aggressive in that process. Calculate your cash required, and then use all that evidence, the plan that you've developed over the month back in store, the projections that you put forward to negotiate a 6-month deal with your landlords. The reason I say 6 months is because even after the first month, the remaining 5 months before we get to a place where everyone starts to settle in this new economy, not the old economy, will start becoming evident. You will need some sort of flexibility over here to learn as you go. You will find that things that work perhaps in the month ahead might not work in the month that follows. You then need to decide if you succeed in your negotiations on a go, no go. To simply not concede, or to simply concede to negotiations that don't support and work for a business built out this way in the retail space, means that any funding you have left, you'll be throwing into a dark hole. I would, at that point, if you have no success in your negotiations and you're not convinced that the negotiations put on the table will support a cash flow projection with a 50% drop in sales to a 50 to 70% drop in sales, then I think you need to be in a position where you decide to step back. If you get to the other side of that and you've run for 6 months, you're in green. And if you're in green, it's time to grow. From month 7, when you're back in store, finalize all your offerings to clients. You would understand what your customers and clients are looking for. You would have reshaped your floor space. You would have reshaped your offering. Your team would have become adept at selling the new offerings. You want to start building real systems in play over there. The way that staff are greeted, the way that customers are greeted, the way that customers are engaged, the way that you deliver your service. As restaurateurs, you know your systems. As retailers in the electronics and clothing space, you need systems to engage with people in the manner that you have learned is the most effective form of engagement over the last 6 months. If you can start instituting those into systems, what it does is it stabilizes your environment and it creates predictability and consistency around the customer expectation. What's exciting about that, if you can get to this point, is that all of a sudden, if you have a system-driven business that has been adapted and suited to the new COVID economy we're going to be living in for a month after the 7th month, for a year after the 7th month, and you're confident that you can operate that business, and you've been able to demonstrate that you've had consistent performance as a result of this new offering for the last 6 months, there will be many, many superb locations available and leases on offer at rates that you would not have seen for a long time. The opportunity, if you can get to month 7 post-lockdown to then grow your retail stores is going to be profound. Let's talk a little bit about empathy, putting yourself in many other people's shoes. And we need to start with landlords because that's what this seminar is about. This webinar specifically looks at how you negotiate with the landlord. They have costs. Most landlords carry bonds. They carry debts on their balance sheets. They raise money in order to build the properties, refurb properties, and make accommodation available, whether it be in the retail space, the commercial space, manufacturing space. It's the same story almost everywhere. Very few landlords who operate good facilities do not carry overhead and debt burdens behind them. They owe the bank money. The bank has to collect that money. If the bank does not collect the money, that bank itself stands the risk of being compromised from its prudential security. And that is a relationship the bank has with the South African Reserve Bank. So a landlord's ability to negotiate with you is going to be linked to their ability to negotiate with the banks, which is going to be linked with their ability to negotiate with the South African Reserve Bank as the prudential authority. At the same time, landlords have investors. Their ability to negotiate with you is going to be tied to their ability to negotiate with their investors. If they miss their targets and performance, and their balance sheets are impaired as a result of that, the investors have all sorts of rights that create an increased cost to the landlord's operational activities. When landlords say they are unable to negotiate with you because they themselves are unable to negotiate with their source of funding and their investors, it's something you need to pay attention to. We have a remedy for it. I will get to it, but you need to be aware of it. They have operating costs. If a facility is locked down, it still has to run. It still has to be kept clean. It still has to be maintained. Pest control continues. Operating costs continue. They have rates and taxes, a classic example of operating costs. Their ability to negotiate with you depends on their ability to negotiate with municipalities too, on the rates and taxes issue. They have staff, and staff need to be paid. Security is an essential service, and the security is alive, even in a lockdown center. They've got maintenance. It continues whether the center is being open or not open. Having empathy for the landlord is the starting point because empathy builds respect. If you negotiate with me and you demonstrate an understanding of me, that in itself, when I feel heard and understood, opens my ears and it opens my heart. If I feel that I'm heard and understood, I begin to trust that your bona fides, your good faith in a negotiation with me, will be cognizant of the challenges that I myself face. It builds trust, and it starts to open a conversation that would allow us to move towards a win-win. I can assure you, there's not one landlord out there that's not cognizant of the reality that should they lose one tenant, the likelihood of replacing that tenant within 3 years is extremely low. If they do replace within 3 years, it takes about 5 years for them to get to profitability with that tenant. You need to earn your rights before you negotiate. And earning your rights means a couple of things. Get your plan in place, your 1 month lockdown plan, your 1 month post-lockdown plan, the 6 months post-lockdown plan, and then your plan thereafter. In the lockdown, the 6 months, it means you need to have your numbers ready. Bearing in mind those numbers will change. You need to organize your people. And you need to think about the people you need to restart the business when we go out of lockdown back into the open economy, or rather the partly opened economy. Organize your staff into those that you must have, those that are good to have, and those that are nice to have. If everybody's going to be taking pain in this process, I can assure you many members of your staff expect the world that they lived in prior to lockdown to be fundamentally different to their relationship with you post-lockdown. It's key that you hold on to the start, that you need to restart your business the moment you get back. Cut costs and reduce overheads. We've said this. Use all the COVID support that's out there, that's been offered by government and other institutions. Demonstrate that you have exhausted all of this. Then demonstrate you have worked with your suppliers. And only then do you negotiate with your landlord. If your landlord can see that you had a plan for lockdown, the 6 months ahead, you've got your numbers ready, you've worked with your people and you've organized your people, and you have found concession within your people. Bear in mind, everyone is making concessions, including the president with a 30% salary downgrade. If they can see that you have cut costs to reduce overhead, that you've exhausted all the support publicly available, that you've worked with your suppliers actively, they understand that you're coming to them as almost a last resort. But they need to see that you have earned your rights to negotiate. The combination of this process with empathy leads you to your ability to negotiate. Let's look at the negotiation options. In the lockdown, in the 6 months and thereafter, in the lockdown, the view that I hold certainly is there needs to be rental forgiveness for 2 months. The month of April and the month of May should see no rents paid. In my view, it should be law instituted by government. You need it in order to recover from the month lost, and you need it in order to try and preserve as many of your team as possible. It's people that power the business. Losing staff members, especially members who are trained up to be able to deliver your service and offerings in the new manner that you have constructed your service and offerings, simply stalls your business and prevents you earning revenue. I would agree to pay operational costs because the landlord themselves face ongoing operational costs. And I would look to compromise by offering an extension of my rental contract by 2 months at the end of my term. I will get to my final point because my final point says this is a best case scenario, or rather a second best case scenario. A lot of this is going to depend on the landlord's ability to negotiate with its two sources of cost, which are funders, rates, three, and investor returns. If you can get that deal done, it gives you the breathing space to apply the rental that you would have paid for rent back into your staff and back into reshaping your floor and environment for trade. If it means that money then goes into creating a safe space, if it means that you have to dissolve some of your workstations or tables in order to create a 1.5 to 2 meter social distancing environment so that you can attract people back into your store, demonstrating that so in your plan is going to be essential in order to win and secure this contract. At the end of 6 months, or rather at the beginning of the 6-month period after the first month lockdown, try and get your landlords to agree to a completely flexible rental rate. Because you see, in many ways, your landlord is a partner to your success. To the extent that they're able to make their premises perform, to the extent that they're able to assure footfall into the mall or into the shopping center, is directly proportional to the extent that your success and failure lies too. In many ways, if landlords are business partners, which they are, given the fact that you secure a lease, you have a fixed location, and the best you can do is only with what comes into the mall or shopping center, I think it's important that for the 6 months ahead, you should negotiate X% of turnover to be paid to the landlord. This does a number of things. It gives them line in sight as to how successful your business is. It gives them a true insight into the plight that you may or may not be suffering. They need you there as much as you need to remain there. I would be very interested to hear from landlords, how many tenants do you lose before the entire vibrancy and appeal of the center itself collapses? Those stats will be run, and I'm pretty confident that they've already been managed or considered before. You create vibrancy in amongst the very big chain stores, in amongst the very big supermarkets, in amongst the very big retail brands. It's the independent retailers that create the experience and the vibrancy and the joy of visiting a mall or shopping center, because it's the variety that you bring and the unusualness that you bring to, with respect, the very bland, big chain stores. Operational costs you would continue to pay, and thereafter, at the end of 6 months, once you have a good sight of what the future looks like in terms of your revenues, and landlords have a good sense of what your performance is going to look like in this new economy, you can then go to a place of renegotiating new leases. This, to me, is the only viable option that any retailer should be considering. So let's talk about that negotiation. You're going to need heart and you're going to need head. It is an emotional time for everybody. I think it's important you let your feelings be heard. The show this morning with Wendy Alberts and Eusebius McKaiser was profound. To hear the story of retailers themselves, specifically in this instance, in the restaurant trade, talking about the challenges they face, talking about what's happening to their staff, is important because we are all in together. That landlord, that human being you're negotiating with, is also locked down at home, is also homeschooling, is also trying to hold things together. Connect first on a human level and insist on it. And the way you do that is by talking about what's happening at your home, what's happening at their home, and what's happening to your personal environment, and ask about theirs too. A lot of people who want to be tough in negotiation try very hard to avoid the emotional element of connection first. If you don't get the emotional connection first, using all the rational arguments in the world will only yield 50% of their impact. We are human, it's the way we are. Prepare and be honest. Don't be tricky-dicky. If a landlord suspects that you want to move onto a rental a contract that's as a percentage of turnover, you need to demonstrate to them your books, your numbers, show them to what degree those numbers are accurate. If they see that you take cash and you might not be declaring that cash, if there's even that suspicion, the ability to negotiate fairly on a rental clause that's tied to your turnover won't be there. Most will say no, you must persist. Go to their offices, go to their homes if you need to. Stop paying rent until you get the negotiation done, because you can't afford any other options. You've got to be creative. Understand that your landlords have been approached by many, many other tenants. They themselves have gathered and thought through, what does this mean for them? They themselves understand that if unemployment rates in South Africa rise and increase, it's going to compromise the footfall into their places of tenancy, which is going to compromise your business, which is going to compromise their well-being. They will act tough. They will act definitively. They will pull out contracts. You must persist. Remember, if you've got your plan in place, you've demonstrated how that plan came about, that it wasn't simply sucked from your thumb. You have demonstrated that you have spoken to all the parties concerned that are responsible for the well-being of your business. If you show good faith and bona fides, persist, but be open to alternatives that they put on the table. Be objective driven. Know this, that if the alternative put on the table to the one that you've sought and wanted does not work for your plan, you ought to consider closing. And remember, you're going to be measured by your actions, not what you say. Don't present yourself for negotiation unprepared. You lose your credibility in an instance. My advice is to be the best that you can be. We're all sailing in very uncharted waters. And you know, when you're sailing a ship and when you're sailing a boat and you've got your crew on board, you can only be the best you can be in the moment that you act. Prepare then act. Do so with confidence, clarity, and certainty that what you have done is the right approach to the extent that you understand your business and the environment, and then lead. And that means act. I'm going to give something to you, which I really hope you take up, because that's what leadership is all about. It's important, yes, that you work with your trade associations, and it's important, yes, that you work with your franchisor, or you work with your colleagues in the retail space. But it means that you yourself need to lead. It means that you yourself need to take that action. I want you to consider something. Churchill, in World War II, said, by rule of government, every single person's home will be insured by government. What he meant was this. When the bombings began, in London especially, and throughout England, if your or my neighbor's home was bombed, government insured it to the extent that it would be rebuilt using taxpayers' money. He argued that in a war, we are all in it together. In a war, there ought not to be winners and losers. The position that I hold personally is that we are in a war. We are sitting in a 100-year event. The economy has been shut down for some and not others. The people who are carrying most of the costs at the moment, given the current shutdown and regulations regarding the shutdown, is the SME business owner and their staff. At the end of this month, in 10 days' time, all the debit orders and installments are going to run in people's accounts. Any smart person would have removed their pay in order to feed themselves and feed their families. This is especially true for many of our Black compatriots, for they really truly do live in an environment where Black tax is alive and well. It is extensively so in Black culture that if your neighbor's suffering, you need to step up to the plate. The number of conversations I've had with my Black business colleagues who are running their private businesses and are now finding that beyond looking after their staff, beyond looking after their families, they have to start looking after neighbors and communities as the lockdown and the economic impact of the lockdown takes place becomes present. Should good people who have been law-abiding, who have earned salaries of 8, 15, 20,000 Rand a month, suddenly then have to face a whole series of installments so some of the big players in the market can enjoy the benefit of ongoing trade, and they themselves are pushed into a position where, because the installments fail as a result of insufficient funds, which has been used to feed people and take care of people, their credit ratings are diminished. That is not fair. It's not fair. It's equally not fair that any retailer who has been prevented from trading should have to face any costs that aren't linked to generating that retailer's turnover. It's not fair. It's not fair that a landlord should have to make concessions if concessions aren't made to the landlord. If that means the banks, it's not fair that the banks should have to make concessions if concessions to their prudential ratings are not made by the governor of our Reserve Bank. The reason Churchill said that is because when the state makes a ruling that everyone's home will be insured, it meant that no insurance company carried the cost of it, no funding institution carried the cost of it, no resident or citizen carried the cost of it. It simply stopped the economy for the period that this took place in order for everyone to reset and pick up from where they left off. It's my personal view that government should implement a complete freeze on all installments, on all rents, and on any obligations owed by anybody for the next 2 months. Because if we don't do that, there's a high likelihood that as a country, we're going to force what is, in my view, the most important people into a state of extreme impoverishment. And that is that private business owner who has risked everything that they have to invest in their store, to run their business, and to make things happen and work. So, in order to make this happen, I have negotiated an opportunity for Bruce Whitfield, who is, in my view, a leading financial journalist and a man who has the ability to extract deep understanding, communications, and empathy from multiple parties, to run a roundtable discussion on Thursday this week at 10 a.m. through a webinar. He's going to be facilitating a discussion with somebody representing a retailer's position, a landlord's position, the funder's position, the investor's position, and hopefully a view from the prudential authorities. Because whilst we can rave about contracts and use contracts to negotiate with each other, in the normal course of everyday business, I think it's fundamentally fair. A contract gives certainty and comfort for every transaction. But we are not in that environment. We're moving to, very quickly, a place in a space where what should be done is what is morally right. No contracts of engagement between any parties ever envisaged what we are currently going through, irrespective as to whether there is an act of God clause or not, irrespective as to whether it's interpreted correctly or not. If the economy is going to be shut down and only essential services are going to be operating in order to maintain our well-being as a society, then everybody's operating overheads should be shut down too, until they can find themselves in a position where they can earn the revenues in order to settle their obligations and contractual requirements. That is the nature of fairness, and that's the nature of how contracts come about. I'm going to please ask you to join us for that webinar, because in doing so, you are acting. In doing so, in facilitating the opportunity for us to have this webinar, where we can get the parties talking to each other who aren't talking to each other to reach compromises, and hopefully present it to government with a view to stop and stall all payments for everybody over the next 2 months until we understand what we are facing, so that we can prevent everybody from moving into poverty or being diminished as a result of their inability to trade. It is, I believe, one of the strongest things you can do to consolidate for us as SMEs an extremely fragmented environment around a roundtable discussion with somebody who I know will then take it above the line in order for those discussions to be had at a political level as well as a corporate level. I know that if the government does this, and that means that the banks are allowed to give concessions to landlords, it means that landlords will be allowed to give concessions to you. Everybody wins in this instance. Please, please spread the word for this webinar. Please attend it. We will run polls during that webinar. And to the extent that you want some power at the table to negotiate the well-being of your future, please be at that webinar. With that, I end off. A recording of this webinar will be presented. It'll be at auric.com, where we have a YouTube channel. All the previous webinars that we run are there too. Specific questions you want answered and topics you want covered will equally be covered over there. And together we are one. Pay it forward. If you found this helpful, if you believe that the roundtable discussion will start opening the channels of communication to get people talking in order for us to all win from the shutdown, as opposed to only some win and most others lose, please spread the word of this and get people to register for that webinar itself. And with that, it's a book that I wrote that might be useful to read. It's also available in an Audible version. But with that, I thank you very much for your attendance. I really hope to have your support in taking this above the line. My concerns are deep and profound, and I think very real about what will emerge if we allow the unemployment rates to increase, or if we unfairly and unjustly put people into poverty or diminish their credit ratings because of the circumstances, the very unusual circumstances we face. And with that, I thank you. We will be emailing all of you who attended with the details of that webinar on Thursday. Again, please promote it widely. Thank you for attending, and I will revert to the chat line now in order to receive any further information that you think would be useful for that Thursday event.